The chamber was chaos dressed in ceremony. Murmurs rolled through the marble walls like a storm trapped indoors, bouncing off the polished desks and iron suits. Every camera light blinked in anticipation, every face leaned forward, half expecting, half dreading the next blow. At the center stood Jasmine Crockett, her voice steady but her eyes sharp as flint. She had just finished speaking, a truth laced with fury and faith, and now the silence that followed was almost cruel. Someone across the aisle chuckled, the kind of dismissive sound that stings more than words. A few heads turned away, others smirked. It was the ritual humiliation the chamber knew too well, the unspoken rule that those who spoke too plainly, too passionately, were to be put in their place. For a heartbeat, it felt like the air itself was turning against her. But then it happened. A chair scraped back, a deliberate sound, clean and loud enough to slice through the tension. Mitt Romney rose slowly, eyes locked forward, expression unreadable. The chatter died, the cameras pivoted. You could feel every heartbeat in that room freeze mid-thud. He adjusted his jacket, calm, composed, the image of restraint, and then spoke a sentence that no one expected to hear. He said he respected her. He said her argument carried a truth that transcended partisanship. He said it was time to listen. Gasps broke the silence like glass. For a fleeting moment, even the ceiling seemed to exhale. Crockett blinked, not in disbelief, but in acknowledgement, as if to say she'd been waiting for this kind of courage all along. The narrator's voice cut through the moment like a lens focusing in. This wasn't just support. It was rupture. A split second that made history pause to question itself. The old order, the unspoken hierarchies, the tribal noise, all of it met under the weight of one unexpected act of respect. The room didn't just fall silent. It bowed to something rare. Dignity, meeting courage, and public view. But what led to this extraordinary reversal of loyalty would expose everything we thought we knew about Washington. 48 hours earlier, the chamber was already humming with unease. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm breaks. Reporters crowded the gallery. Aides shuffled papers they no longer pretended to read. The debate over the new economic reform bill had split Congress clean down its moral spine, a class not just of policy, but of purpose. To one side, it was about fiscal restraint. To the other, it was about dignity, who gets to thrive and who gets left behind. Jasmine Crockett entered the floor with her notes clutched tight, but her stride unflinching. Every headline in the past week had painted her as combative, emotional, impossible to rein in. But that morning, she looked calm, almost surgical, the kind of calm that means the blade is sharp and ready. She wasn't just there to debate a bill. She was there to challenge the entire tone of power. Across the aisle, Mitt Romney watched quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. For years he had played the role of measured dissent, a man caught between tradition and conscience. He'd seen countless debates burn bright and fade cold. Yet something about this moment felt different. The narrator's voice swelled with quiet gravity. This was more than political theater. This was the collision of two moral philosophies, the question of whether truth could still stand without shouting. The stakes weren't written on the bill. They were written on the faces in that room, the ones who still believed and the ones who long stopped trying. Everyone watching knew something bigger was brewing, something that could rewrite the tone of American politics. The backlash came fast, rehearsed, and merciless. Before Jasmine Crockett could even finish her opening arguments, the chorus of doubt had already begun its song. The anchors smiled through their skepticism, their words coated with the politeness of dismissal. Passionate, they called her, the way people do when they mean uncontrolled. One headline labeled her a firebrand without a plan. Another questioned whether she understood the complexities of governance. The implication was clear. Her conviction was a weakness, her emotion a flaw. Clips looped endlessly. Her raising her voice in committee, her standing her ground when interrupted, her eyes unwavering under condescension. Each frame was replayed, dissected, twisted into caricature. Too radical, one pundit warned. Too new to understand how the game is played, another scoffed. They said it like gospel, and the echo chamber amplified it until cynicism sounded like common sense. Inside the Capitol, the whispers were worse. Some colleagues exchanged knowing glances whenever her name was mentioned, pretending it was all strategy and not prejudice. Others dismissed her behind closed doors, calculating her every word as if authenticity were a liability. The machinery of Washington was doing what it always did, grinding down sincerity into something safer, blander, more manageable. And through it all, Romney watched. He didn't join the jeers, but neither did he challenge them. He'd heard this melody before, the slow destruction of anyone who dared to speak too directly. It was the same tone that had once turned on him when he'd spoken of conscience over party. Yet this time, something about it felt heavier. The narrator's voice tightened. The doubt surrounding Crockett wasn't just about her. It was about the system's fear of anyone who refused to be small. But behind the whispers and headlines, something in Romney's expression was changing, a shift that even his closest aides couldn't explain. Before the chamber, before the headlines, before her name became a hashtag, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl from Texas who refused to be quiet. She didn't grow up with privilege. She grew up with purpose. Her mother worked long hours. Her father spoke often about dignity, and together they taught her that silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of betrayal. As a young public defender, she learned the language of the unheard. Her days were spent in crowded courtrooms, defending people whose stories never made it past the docket sheet. She fought for the accused, the overlooked, the forgotten. Every case left a mark. Every victory, a scar. It was there that she discovered her fire, not the kind that burns for glory, but the kind that burns for truth. When she spoke, juries listened, not because she was loud, but because she believed every word. She carried that same conviction into activism, standing shoulder to shoulder with communities who had stopped believing anyone in power would ever stand for them. She organized, protested, negotiated, sometimes winning, often losing, but never stopping. Her path to Congress wasn't paved with endorsements or big donors. It was carved out by persistence. People saw themselves in her, imperfect, impatient, but unbreakable. Every handshake at a rally, every late-night meeting, every door knock added to a quiet momentum that no consultant could script. Now, years later, standing on the House floor, that same grit was visible in the set of her shoulders, in the calm steadiness of her voice. The establishment had its polished smiles and rehearsed decorum. Crockett had something else, the authenticity of someone who'd earned every inch of her place. The narrator's tone softens, like a camera panning across time. She was never built for comfort. She was built for confrontation with purpose. Each word she spoke in the chamber carried echoes of the courtroom, the rallies, the streets where her belief in fairness had been tested and proven. And when the debate began, the fire she carried from those years finally met the cold calculation of Washington's elite. The chamber erupted the moment Jasmine Crockett began to speak. Her words were measured, but the reaction was instant. Interruptions, scoffs, whispered asides that rose into open laughter. It was the same old choreography, power performing arrogance. Yet she didn't flinch. She paused, waited, and continued, her tone calm enough to make the noise sound childish. Across the aisle, senior members leaned back in their chairs, trading glances that said more than words. Simplistic, one muttered, idealistic, another sighed. Each label was meant to shrink her argument, to turn conviction into naivete. But every attempt only sharpened her focus. She spoke of working families, of opportunity denied, of the obligation of government to serve, not just to rule. The narrator's rhythm tightened, voices overlapping like waves crashing, mockery against reason, cynicism against clarity. Yet Crockett's steadiness was disarming. Her tone stayed even, her eyes locked on those trying to throw her off balance. The contrast was almost cinematic, youth and sincerity framed against the weathered face of political exhaustion. Romney watched from his seat, his expression shifting with every exchange. He'd seen fiery speeches before, but this was different. There was no performance in her delivery, no script in her defiance. She wasn't fighting for airtime, she was fighting for truth. The murmurs around him grew louder, but his attention stayed fixed. The camera of imagination pans closer, Crockett unyielding, surrounded by the hum of a system built to drown voices like hers. The tempo built to a heartbeat of suspense, and the narrator's voice dropped to a near whisper. And then, with one final rebuttal, she forced even her loudest critics to stop mid-sentence. The air felt heavy, charged with that brittle tension that comes right before truth either breaks through or is buried alive. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, every word she'd prepared dissolving into instinct. The interruptions had come in waves, accusations of oversimplifying, condescension disguised as critique, but she had weathered them all. Now her voice was calm, unwavering, each syllable landing like a measured strike. "Let's be clear," she began, steady and surgical. "This isn't about ideology, it's about accountability. It's about whether we serve the people who sent us here or the donors who never will." A murmur swept through the chamber, but she didn't pause. You call it radical to want working families to earn a living wage. You call it divisive to acknowledge inequality. But what's truly radical is a government that forgets its own humanity. Each phrase hit like a gavel. The usual suspects shifted in their seats. A few rolled their eyes. One senior member smirked, a reflex of power dismissing truth. Crockett caught it, met his gaze, and continued, voice softening just enough to draw everyone closer. "I was taught that integrity isn't a political strategy, it's a moral one. And if that makes me emotional, then maybe emotion is what's missing here." For a moment the room went still, that rare kind of silence that means people are actually listening. And then, unexpectedly, a voice broke it. Calm, low, male. Mitt Romney. He rose slowly, the movement deliberate, almost reluctant, as if fighting gravity itself. His colleagues turned, startled. Some looked confused, others alarmed. He adjusted his jacket. His signature pause gave weight to what was coming. He said, "I'd like to respond." No one interrupted. Romney looked directly at Crockett, his tone measured but warm. He said, "Congresswoman Crockett is right." He said simply. The words hung in the air like an aftershock. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of disbelief. Crockett stood still, her eyes searching his for the familiar trace of irony, but there was none. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't grandstanding. He was, for once, breaking rank with the cynicism that had long kept him safe. Romney continued, his voice gathering conviction. "We can debate methods all day, but there's no debate about the values she's talking about. Fairness, dignity, service. These ideas don't belong to one side of the aisle. They belong to anyone still brave enough to believe in them." The chamber, once an orchestra of egos, was suddenly silent. Cameras zoomed, Reporters scribbled, aides froze mid-breath. Even the skeptics seemed unsure whether to frown or applaud. The narrator's voice deepened, cinematic. It wasn't the words themselves that changed the room, it was the choice to say them. In that pause, America felt something it hadn't in years: genuine respect across the aisle. Crockett nodded, the faintest trace of gratitude in her eyes, but she didn't bask in it. She knew better. Respect in Washington was fragile, fleeting, conditional. Yet for one fleeting moment, the chamber had remembered its humanity. Romney took his seat again, the gravity of his statement rippling outward. Phones buzzed, staffers whispered into earpieces. The internet was already catching fire. But inside that room, no one dared to speak too soon. The old script, that partisanship was permanent, that truth couldn't cross boundaries, had been shattered in real time. The narrator's voice returned, softer now, almost reverent. It wasn't an endorsement of policy, it was an endorsement of principle. And in a town starving for sincerity, that was revolutionary. For Crockett, it wasn't victory. It was validation, proof that truth, when spoken plainly, still had the power to pierce through the static. For Romney, it was a quiet reckoning, reminder of the man he once promised himself he'd be. And as the first wave of applause began, hesitant, scattered but real, a feeling swept through the chamber that no strategist could engineer: hope. But as the chamber erupted, what happened next would prove this wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a turning point. Within minutes, the chamber's silence had turned into a digital roar. The clip hit social media before the session even adjourned, a 30-second moment that detonated across timelines. On Twitter, hashtags multiplied like wildfire. Hashtag respect across the aisle. Hashtag Romney listens. Hashtag Crockett was right. The footage looped endlessly. Her composure, his words, the stunned stillness afterward, an instant artifact of political history replayed on repeat. Cable anchors filled the airwaves with disbelief. One host leaned forward, eyes wide, declaring, "In an era of outrage, this was different." Another called it the first bipartisan heartbeat we've seen in years. Commentators who had made careers out of division suddenly sounded nostalgic, even hopeful. Did we just see a reset? Someone asked on national television, voice tinged with wonder. Meanwhile, the internet was alive with reaction videos. Young creators stitched the moment into edits over orchestral soundtracks. TikToks captured tear-eyed viewers whispering, "Finally, someone said it." On Reddit threads and Discord servers, politics-weary 20-somethings debated what it meant, not just for Crockett, but for America itself. For the first time in forever, it felt like Congress was human again. One viral comment read, "Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. They joked, they applauded, they slowed the footage down frame by frame, trying to catch the exact second Romney's expression softened, the exact instant respect triumphed over ego." By morning, opinion pieces flooded every outlet. Some framed it as a rare act of courage. Others warned it was nothing more than optics. Yet beneath the noise, one truth lingered. People felt something. They felt relief. They felt pride. They felt possibility. The narrator's voice returned, low and reflective, cutting through the digital frenzy. The world wasn't celebrating a policy shift. It was celebrating a pulse of sincerity in a machine built on performance. But beneath the applause, an even deeper question began to echo. Could this actually change anything? In the days that followed, the moment took on a life of its own, replayed not just as a political oddity, but as something rare, a glimpse of what decency still looked like. The headlines faded, the arguments resumed, but the clip remained. It lingered because it carried something deeper than debate. It carried grace. The narrator's voice softened, almost reverent. This wasn't about winning a point. It was about proving that courage doesn't always sound like shouting. In an age addicted to outrage, one act of calm integrity had cut through the static like a bell. Romney's decision was dissected endlessly. Some called it betrayal, others call it bravery. But history, the voice reminded us, rarely rewards those who follow the script. His words weren't about party, they were about principle, about the stubborn insistence that truth should matter more than team colors. It was the kind of stand that doesn't trend for long, but leaves a mark that lasts. And Crockett, she never claimed victory. She didn't need to. Her strength was never in the volume of her rebuttal, but in the stillness of her belief. She had shown that leadership isn't about dominance, it's about dignity. Her composure became its own kind of protest, quiet, unyielding, unforgettable. The narrator paused, letting the emotion breathe. True power isn't the ability to silence others, it's the courage to listen, even when the world rewards noise. As the screen faded to black and white stills of that day, the handshake, the stunned faces, and the rare shared smile, one truth lingered in the silence that followed. In an age of noise, one act of respect became louder than 1,000 arguments. Mitt Romney supports Jasmine Crockett's ideas, and in doing so, reminded America that respect is still possible. What happened in that chamber wasn't just a headline, it was a heartbeat, proof that even in a divided nation, courage can still bridge the impossible. Maybe this is how change begins, not with outrage, but with understanding, not with dominance, but with dignity. Crockett's calm defiance and Romney's quiet honesty showed that leadership can still mean listening, that conviction and compassion don't have to be enemies.